My brother arrived with boxes and said, "I'm moving in." Mom and Dad always, sometimes I wonder if my life is just one giant reality TV show. Because how else do you explain your own brother, your own flesh and blood, showing up on your property, with moving boxes, calmly announcing, "I'm moving in"? Mom and Dad always said this house would be mine. My jaw hit the floor, because what he didn't know is that I had bought that very house months ago to settle our parents' debt, the debt he helped create. Every family has that one sibling, don't they? The one who gets a free pass on life, the golden child. For us, that was Greg, my older brother. He didn't just ride the wave of favoritism, he practically invented it. Growing up in our small town of Portsville, Greg could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Linda and Jim, my folks, treated him like a prince no matter what he did, or more accurately, what he didn't do. It started so early. As kids, Greg was always the loudest, the flashiest, the most demanding presence in any room. He had this uncanny knack for getting exactly what he wanted. For years, I just thought it was because he was older, more outgoing. But as I got older, a chilling realization dawned on me. Greg was a master manipulator, especially when it came to our parents. Take school. Greg struggled. In everything. But instead of letting him face the music, Mom and Dad would leap into action. Failing a math test? Instant private tutor. Forgot a huge project? Mom would stay up all night, practically doing it for him. Meanwhile, I was on my own. If I dared ask for help, the response was always the same. "You're smart, Mike. You'll figure it out." And I did figure it out because I had to. But it was impossible not to notice the stark double standard. Greg's failures were met with boundless sympathy and support, while my successes were just expected. I remember in middle school, I nailed my science fair project, perfect score. My dad's response? "Good job, Mike. Now go help Greg with his homework." Seriously? By our teens, Greg's golden boy treatment wasn't just annoying, it was infuriating. He got a shiny secondhand Jeep for his 16th birthday. Dad spent months fixing it up, pouring his heart into it. I still pictured Dad beaming, showing off his handiwork under the hood. Greg? He barely mumbled a thanks before grabbing the keys and tearing off to hang with his friends. Me? When I turned 16, I got Greg's old bike and a lecture about the value of hard work. "You'll appreciate it more if you save up for it yourself," Dad said. Fair lesson, right? But why did it only apply to me? Greg had this infuriating way of turning every situation to his advantage. One summer, our neighbor, Mrs. Andrews, paid me to mow her lawn after surgery. It was tough work, but the extra cash was worth it. Greg caught wind of it and suddenly had to be involved. Except he didn't want to mow. He just wanted half the money. "Come on, Mike," he whined, lounging against the fence while I sweated in 90-degree heat. "We're brothers. You should share." When I told him to get lost, he ran straight to Mom, spinning some sob story about how I wasn't being a team player. Next thing I knew, Mom was telling me I had to split the money. Greg didn't lift a finger, but he walked away with half my earnings. As we grew older, his entitlement didn't fade. It grew. I was busting my butt, studying, working part-time, trying to build a future. Greg? He floated through life, directionless. He tried college for a semester, then dropped out because, as he put it, the professors just don't get me. After that, it was a revolving door of dead-end jobs. My parents? Still making excuses. "He just needs time to figure things out," Mom would sigh, as if Greg wasn't already 25 and living rent-free in their basement. Dad was just as bad, defending Greg to anyone who dared criticize him. "At least he's here," he'd say. That's more than we can say for Mike. Apparently, my decision to leave Portsville for college and build a career in Chicago made me the bad guy. Never mind that I was financially independent and visited regularly to help out. Greg was the loyal son because he stayed put. The most frustrating thing was Greg's utter lack of appreciation. My parents bent over backward for him, and he acted like it was the bare minimum. One time, Mom spent hours making his favorite lasagna with homemade garlic bread. Greg barely glanced at it before asking, "Couldn't you have made steak instead?" I sat there fuming, wondering how someone could be so ungrateful. But Mom and Dad just laughed it off. "That's just Greg. Mom chirped, as if that excused everything. For years, I tried to stay out of it. Told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But the resentment was a constant low burn, building with every visit home. I'd walk in, see Greg sprawled on the couch, glued to his phone, while my parents practically worshipped him. I'd barely get through the door before they handed me a to-do list. Mike, can you fix the gutters? Mike, can you mow the lawn? One Thanksgiving, it finally blew up. Greg had done absolutely nothing all day. I'd helped Mom cook, cleaned up after dinner, even ran to the store when Dad realized we were out of ice. As we sat down for dessert, Greg casually tossed out, "Hey, Mike, can you take care of my car? It needs an oil change." I just stared at him, stunned. "Why don't you do it yourself?" He shrugged. "I don't really know how." Before I could respond, Mom chimed in. "Mike, you're good with cars. It wouldn't hurt to help your brother out." That was it. I pushed my plate away, stood up, and said, "You know what? I'm done." And I walked out. I realized I couldn't keep letting myself get dragged into Greg's messes. He was never going to change, and my parents were never going to stop enabling him. The only thing I could do was set boundaries and focus on my own life. But Greg's entitlement and my parents' favoritism would eventually reach a whole new level. And this time, I wasn't about to let it slide. You'd think I'd stop being surprised, but let me tell you, nothing could have prepared me for the day I found out about the will. It wasn't even my parents who told me. It came from Mrs. Turner, a family friend with a habit of oversharing. Honestly, I don't think she meant to stir the pot, but she certainly did. We were catching up at a coffee shop during one of my rare trips back to Portsville. Somewhere between talking about her cats and her new garden, she casually mentioned, "Your parents are so sweet, wanting Greg to have the lake house. That cabin means so much to your family." I almost spit out my coffee. "What did you just say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The lake house," she repeated, like it was obvious. "They're leaving it to Greg. It's in their will, right?" At first, I thought she had to be mistaken. How could they do something like that? The lake house wasn't just Greg's or mine. It was ours. It was supposed to be for the whole family. It's where we spent summers fishing, swimming, roasting marshmallows by the fire. Growing up, it was the one place where I didn't feel like I was playing second fiddle to Greg. It felt neutral, ours. But apparently, that wasn't the case anymore. I went home that day, absolutely stewing. Maybe Mrs. Turner had misunderstood. Maybe my parents hadn't actually decided anything yet. Still, something about it felt too real. My parents had always had a blind spot for Greg, so was it really that far-fetched? I decided to confront them. The next day, I stopped by their house. As soon as I walked in, I could tell they weren't expecting me. Mom was knitting on the couch, Dad fiddling with a gadget at the kitchen table. They both looked up, surprised, but not exactly thrilled. "Mike, what brings you here?" Mom asked, a little too brightly. I didn't bother with small talk. "Is it true you're leaving the lake house to Greg?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. The room went dead silent. Mom slowly put down her knitting, avoiding eye contact. Dad suddenly found the screws on his gadget very interesting. "Where did you hear that?" Mom finally asked. "It doesn't matter where I heard it," I shot back. "Is it true?" That's when they launched into their usual script, the one they always use to defend Greg. "Well, Greg has always been here for us," Mom said, like that explained everything. "He's the one who helps out when we need something." I actually laughed out loud. Couldn't help it. "Greg helps out? Are you serious? The guy can't even hold a job, and you're giving him the lake house." "Mike," Dad said, using that tone he always reserved for when he thought I was being unreasonable. "It's not about that. Greg has stayed close to home. He's been here for us. You've got your life in Chicago. You don't need the lake house." "And Greg does?" I shot back. "So he can throw parties and mooch off your hard work? That place was supposed to be for both of us. You've said that my whole life." That's when Mom hit me with the line that truly twisted the knife. "You're doing fine, Mike. You don't need it." There it was. I didn't need it because I'd built a life for myself, worked hard, and didn't rely on them for handouts. They decided I didn't deserve the one thing that tied me to my childhood. It wasn't just about the lake house. It was about everything. It was the perfect, painful symbol of how little they thought of me compared to Greg. Wow, I said, shaking my head. I always knew you favored Greg, but this is a whole new level. Oh, don't be dramatic, Mom said, waving her hand like I was a teenager throwing a tantrum. We're just trying to do what's fair. Fair? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How is it fair to give Greg everything while I get nothing? That's not true, Dad interjected. We're not giving him everything. You'll get your share of the inheritance. The inheritance? Great. So, while Greg gets the house, I'm supposed to be grateful for whatever leftover cash they decide to toss my way. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about principle, about feeling like I actually mattered in this family. I left before the conversation could get any worse. On the drive back to my place, I couldn't stop replaying it all. The way they dismissed my feelings, how quickly they jumped to defend Greg. It was infuriating, but it also wasn't surprising. This was just who they were. Part of me wondered if I was overreacting, but deep down I knew I wasn't. If the roles were reversed, if I were the one struggling and Greg were the successful, independent one, would they still have made the same choice? I doubted it. After a few days, I vented to my friend Sean, who's known me since college. He wasn't surprised either. They've always played favorites, man, he said when I told him the story. But you've got to ask yourself, why do you even care? You don't need their stupid lake house. You're better off without it. He was right, of course. I didn't need it, but it was about what it represented. Years of being overlooked, of working twice as hard for half the recognition, of being told that my successes didn't count because I was fine. It's not about needing it, I told him. It's about what's fair. And this isn't fair. For a while, I tried to just move on. Told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But every time I thought about the lake house, about Greg sitting there on the porch, acting like he earned it, I couldn't let it go. My parents had spent years enabling him, making excuses for him, and now they were rewarding him for it. I wasn't just angry at Greg, I was angry at them, too. They'd always treated me like the backup plan, the reliable one who didn't need their support. And now, when it came time to make a decision that actually mattered, they'd chosen Greg again. After months of silence, my parents finally decided to reach out. I'd gone no contact after the lake house fiasco because, honestly, I'd had enough. I was tired of being the overlooked son, the one they only called when they needed something fixed or a favor done. So, when those emails and voicemails started flooding in, I knew something was up. They didn't reach out to me unless they needed something. The first message was from Mom, a short, overly casual email with no specifics. Hi, Mike. Hope you're doing well. Things have been a little hard lately, and we miss hearing from you. Let's catch up soon. It was vague enough to make me suspicious, so I ignored it. Next came a voicemail from Dad. His tone was softer than usual, almost rehearsed. Hey, Mike, it's your dad. Just wanted to see how you've been. It's been a while since we talked, and we'd really like to see you. Family's important, you know. Give us a call when you can. Still, I let it go. I wasn't about to play into their guilt trips, especially not after everything that had gone down. I knew them well enough to know this wasn't about family. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because something had gone wrong and they needed my help. Sure enough, the next email from Mom gave it all away. This time, she dropped the pretense and got straight to the point. She talked about how Dad's investments hadn't been doing well, how they were struggling to keep up with expenses. It's been a tough year for us financially, she wrote, adding that Greg was trying his best but couldn't do much to help. I had to laugh at that. Greg's best had always been the bare minimum, and even that was a stretch. Now, when they were in trouble, they were realizing the hard way that their golden boy wasn't going to save the day. Mom's email didn't outright ask for money, but it might as well have. She hinted at how they'd always supported me, and how family sticks together in tough times. The tone was so manipulative, it made my stomach churn. I decided to call her and get straight to the bottom of things. When I got her on the phone, she acted surprised, like she hadn't been flooding my inbox and voicemail. Oh, Mike, it's so good to hear from you, she chirped, her voice all cheery. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. What's going on, Mom? I asked bluntly. Why all the sudden interest in reconnecting? She hesitated. I could practically hear her scrambling for the right words. Well, Mike, you know your dad's investments haven't been doing well, she started. And well, things have been tight lately. We've been talking about making some changes. Changes like what? I asked, already knowing where this was headed. Like downsizing, she admitted. We're also thinking about selling the lake house, and maybe get some help from you. I paused, letting her words sink in. The same lake house they'd promised Greg. The one they'd effectively told me I wasn't worthy of. And now, suddenly, it was on the chopping block because they were in financial trouble. It was almost too much to believe. What does Greg think about that? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Oh, well, you know Greg, she said, trying to sound lighthearted. He's not thrilled, but he understands. I seriously doubted that. Greg had been banking on that house being his someday. It wasn't hard to imagine him throwing a fit behind the scenes, but clearly, my parents weren't about to hold him accountable. That was nothing new. So, let me get this straight, I said. You're struggling because of Dad's bad investments. Greg's still not helping, and now you're selling the house you told him he'd get in your will. Mike, it's not as simple as that, she replied, her voice tinged with defensiveness. We're just trying to do what's best for everyone. Best for everyone, I repeated, barely keeping the sarcasm out of my voice. Right. And I assume everyone includes Greg. That's not fair, she said quickly. We've always tried to do what's best for the family. I almost laughed out loud. Their idea of what's best had always been skewed in Greg's favor, and this was no different. It didn't matter how much trouble he caused or how little he contributed. They'd always find a way to justify it. I let her ramble on for a while, throwing in generic phrases like family comes first and we're all in this together. But I didn't say much. I could tell she was fishing for me to offer help without outright asking for it. But I wasn't about to make it that easy. After a few minutes, I told her I needed to think about everything and hung up. Over the next few days, I kept replaying the conversation. I wasn't surprised they were in financial trouble. Enabling Greg for years had to take a toll. But it still irritated me that they were turning to me for help. I wasn't their safety net, and I wasn't about to let them guilt me into fixing their mess. That said, I couldn't stop thinking about the lake house. For years, they'd treated it like Greg's birthright, something he deserved simply because he'd stuck around. Now, the thought of them losing it, almost felt like poetic justice. They'd spent years prioritizing Greg, and now they were paying the price. I talked it over with a couple of friends. Sean was blunt as always. Dude, they made their bed. Let them lie in it. You don't owe them anything. Another friend, Liz, was more sympathetic but agreed. It's not your responsibility to bail them out, Mike. If Greg's their golden boy, let him figure it out. They were right. Of course, I didn't owe them anything. Still, something about the situation kept gnawing at me. Not because I felt guilty, far from it, but because I hated the idea of Greg somehow worming his way out of this mess unscathed. I didn't have a solution yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, it wasn't going to be on their terms. So, after weeks of letting them stew, I decided to deal with my parents on my terms. I wasn't doing it out of some sense of obligation or guilt. No, those feelings were long gone. This was purely strategic. I wanted to see how bad things really were and figure out if there was an angle I could play. So I called my mom back. When she picked up, she sounded overly chipper, like she'd been waiting by the phone.
Mike.
Oh, it's so good to hear from you. How have you been? I'm fine, Mom, I said, keeping it short. Listen, I've been thinking about what you said about the lake house.
Can we talk about that?
She hesitated, but only for a moment. Of course, Mike. What's on your mind? What's the plan? I asked bluntly. You said you're thinking about selling it. How serious is that? She launched into a whole spiel about how hard things had been and how selling the house would ease some of the financial burden. Finally, I cut her off. All right, I have an idea. There was a pause. Oh, she said cautiously. I'll buy the house, I said straight up. No loans, no delays. I'll pay cash. The silence on the other end was deafening. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped, But then I heard her awkward little laugh. "Oh, Mike, that's very generous, but we couldn't possibly." "I'm not being generous," I cut in. "It's a fair deal. You need the money and I want the house. Simple as that." "But Mike," she started. Greg doesn't own the house," I said firmly. "You and Dad do. And if you're selling it, I'm buying it. If Greg has a problem with that, he can take it up with you." She stammered something about needing to talk to Dad, but I could tell she was caught off guard. This wasn't how she expected the conversation to go. I told her to think it over and let me know, then hung up before she could come up with more excuses. Later that day, Dad called me. He tried to sound authoritative, but he came off as defensive. "Your mom mentioned your offer," he said. "It's unexpected." "Is it a problem?" I asked. "Because if you'd rather sell it to someone else, that's fine. Just say the word." No, he said quickly. "It's not that. It's just complicated." "Complicated how?" I pressed. "Well, Greg's always thought of the lake house as his future home," he said, as if that was supposed to mean something. "We don't want to hurt his feelings." I almost laughed. "His feelings, Dad? This is a financial decision. You're not doing him any favors by letting him think he's entitled to a house you can't afford to keep." There was a long pause. Finally, he sighed. "You're right. It's not easy, Mike." "Nothing about this is easy," I said. "But you need the money, and I'm offering you a solution. If you've got a better idea, I'm all ears." A week later, they called me back to say they'd accept my offer. I could tell they weren't thrilled about it, but they were out of options. My mom tried to spin it as a win-win. "It's good to keep the house in the family," she said, as if that had been their plan all along. I wasn't about to let her rewrite history, but I didn't argue. At this point, I just wanted to get the deal done. We agreed on a fair market price, and I told them I'd handle all the paperwork to make it as easy as possible. They still looked for ways to drag their feet, but within a month, the house was mine. Once the sale was final, I drove up to the lake house to check it out. Walking through the place felt surreal. It had been years since I'd been there, but everything looked almost exactly the same. The worn-out sofa, the creaky dining table, the mismatched curtains. All of it brought back memories of summers spent swimming in the lake and roasting marshmallows by the fire pit. But those memories were bittersweet now. This house had been a symbol of family, once a neutral space where I felt like I mattered just as much as Greg. Over time, it had become something else. A trophy my parents had dangled in front of him, a reward for years of doing nothing. Now, it was mine. After going through the place, I decided to make a few updates. The kitchen appliances were ancient, the floors needed some serious love, and the deck was practically falling apart. I wasn't planning to live there, but I wanted to make it nice again, something I could be proud of. Over the next few weeks, I worked with contractors to get the place fixed up. During that time, I heard nothing from Greg. Part of me wondered if my parents had told him about the sale, or if they were still trying to find a way to spin it. Knowing them, they were probably trying to soften the blow, hoping he wouldn't throw one of his infamous tantrums. Meanwhile, I stayed focused on the renovations. It felt good to pour my energy into something tangible, something that was mine. I wasn't just fixing up the house. I was reclaiming it. This was no longer the place where Greg got all the attention while I faded into the background. This was my space now, and I was determined to make it better than it had ever been. I kept the neighbors in the loop about the changes, and they were surprisingly supportive. A few even offered to help with little projects, a nice reminder that not everyone in Portsville saw me as the other son. They were genuinely excited to see the house getting the care it deserved. By the time the renovations were done, the place looked amazing. The kitchen had sleek new countertops, the floors were polished to perfection, and the deck was finally sturdy enough to hold more than a couple of lawn chairs. I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. But even as I admired the finished product, I knew the real satisfaction would come later. When Greg found out. After years of watching him coast through life, it was finally time for him to face reality. It started with a phone call one evening from Mrs. Collier, a neighbor down the road. She's one of those old-timers who knows everything about everyone. "Mike, hi," she started, a little too cheery. "I just wanted to let you know I saw Greg over at the house earlier. Is everything all right?" I froze. Greg was at the lake house? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Yes, she said, matter-of-factly. He was moving boxes in. I thought you'd asked him to stay there for a while, but something about it seemed off. Off. That was an understatement. I thanked Mrs. Collier and hung up, my mind racing. Greg, moving into my house, without so much as a heads up? That wasn't just bold. It was straight up ridiculous. I jumped in my car and drove straight to the lake house, fuming the entire way. When I arrived, sure enough, there was Greg's beat-up car in the driveway, alongside a stack of boxes, sitting on the porch. I walked up, let myself in, and there he was, casually rearranging furniture like he was redecorating his palace. "What the heck are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharp enough to make him spin around. Greg didn't even look surprised to see me. If anything, he seemed annoyed. "Oh, hey, Mike," he said, as if this was just a normal visit. "Figured you'd stop by eventually." "Eventually?" I demanded. "Greg, this isn't your house. What are you doing here?" He shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "Mom and Dad are downsizing, and they have no place for me in the apartment they've just rented, so I thought I'd move in here, since it's eventually going to be my house. Makes sense, right?" I stared at him, stunned. "Greg, are you serious right now? I bought this house. It's not Mom and Dad's anymore. It's mine." He blinked, like the words didn't quite register. "What do you mean? It's yours?" "I mean, I bought it months ago. It's legally mine.
So you need to leave now."
Greg let out a laugh, but it sounded forced. "Yeah, okay, Mike. Very funny." "I'm not joking," I said, crossing my arms. "Check the deed if you don't believe me." The smug grin on his face faltered as the reality started to sink in. "You bought the house?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Yes, Greg. I bought the house, and I didn't do it so you could move in uninvited." For a moment, he just stood there, looking like he didn't know what to say. Then, as if on cue, he flipped the switch from disbelief to anger. "This is garbage, Mike," he snapped. "You knew I wanted this house. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're trying to screw me over." I couldn't help but laugh. "Jealous of you? Are you kidding me, Greg? You've been living off Mom and Dad your entire life while I've worked my butt off. Don't even try to play the victim here." That only made him angrier. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you?" he spat. "Just because you've got some fancy job in Chicago doesn't mean you can come in and take what's mine." "What's yours?" I shot back. "Greg, you've never lifted a finger for this house. You didn't help pay for it. You didn't maintain it. And you didn't even know how to claim it. So, no, it's not yours. It's mine." Greg's face was bright red at this point, but before he could fire off another round of excuses, I cut him off. "You have until the end of the day to get your stuff out of here. If you don't, I'll call the cops." "You wouldn't," he said, his voice wavering slightly. "Try me," I said, pulling out my phone. "I've already got the paperwork to back me up." "Greg, you're trespassing." He stormed out of the house, muttering something under his breath, and slammed the door behind him. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. Part of me expected him to come back with some grand scheme, but for now, he was gone. That evening, I went back to check on the house. Greg's car was gone, and most of his boxes had disappeared from the porch. Still, I didn't trust that he'd given up completely. This was Greg, after all. He wasn't the type to admit defeat, especially not to me. I installed a security system the next day, cameras, motion detectors, the works. It wasn't cheap, but it gave me peace of mind. If Greg tried to pull something again, I'd be ready. I called my parents to let them know what had happened. "Your son tried to move into my house without asking," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Oh, Mike, that's not fair," Mom said immediately, going on the defensive. "Greg's just going through a hard time. Going through a hard time doesn't give him the right to trespass." I snapped. "I'm not putting up with this. If he tries it again, I'm calling the cops." End of story. "Mike, he's your brother," Dad chimed in. "Can't you just talk to him?"
"No, Dad."
"I'm done talking. He needs to learn that actions have consequences." They didn't like my response, but I didn't care. Greg had been coddled his entire life, and I wasn't about to enable him any further. If he wanted to act like the world owed him something, he could do it somewhere else, preferably far away from me. The next few weeks were quiet, which I took as a sign that Greg had finally backed off. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Greg had always been stubborn, and this situation was no different. He wasn't going to let this go without a fight. But whatever he had planned next, I was ready. I got a call one evening from Mr. Carpenter, a neighbor near the lake house. He's one of those old-timers who's been living in the area forever and knows everything about everyone. "Mike," he said, his voice a mix of concern and disbelief. "Did you know someone's been sneaking around your property?" That immediately caught my attention. "What do you mean, sneaking around?" "Well," he started, "I've seen Greg there a few times this week. He was poking around the backyard, checking the doors. Looked like he was planning something." This wasn't the first time Greg had tried to cross a line, so I wasn't shocked. Annoyed, sure, but not shocked. "Thanks for the heads up," I told Mr. Carpenter. "I'll take care of it." As soon as I hung up, I logged into the security system I'd installed. Sure enough, there he was. The footage showed Greg pacing around the backyard, looking frustrated and defeated. It didn't look like he'd tried to break in, but he was clearly scheming. Instead of confronting him right away, I decided to play it smart. I wanted him to know that I wasn't bluffing when I said the house was off limits. The next morning, I made a quick call to the local police station, explaining the situation. They assured me they'd do a few drive-bys in the area to keep an eye on things. It was a small move, but it gave me some peace of mind. A few days later, I got the notification I'd been waiting for. Greg was back, and this time he wasn't alone. He'd brought a couple of his friends with him, and they were carrying boxes like they were about to move in. I couldn't believe it. Did he really think he could just show up with backup and claim the house? I didn't waste any time. I jumped in my car and drove straight to the lake house. When I pulled into the driveway, Greg and his buddies were standing on the porch, looking like they'd been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. "What the heck are you doing, Greg?" I asked, stepping out of the car. He crossed his arms, trying to look confident. "We're moving in," he said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I couldn't help but laugh. "You're what?" "Moving in," he repeated, his voice tinged with defiance. "Mom and Dad always said this house was supposed to be mine." "Why can't you just let it go, Greg?" I said, shaking my head. "Legally, it's mine. You can't just show up with your buddies and decide to take it over." He scoffed. "Oh, come on. You don't even need it. You're just doing this to spite me." "Let me make this very clear," I said, stepping closer. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the cops. And trust me, I'm dead serious this time, and you won't like the charges that will follow. Do you understand me?" One of Greg's friends muttered something about not wanting to get involved, and the other started edging toward the car. "You wouldn't call the cops on your own brother," Greg said, his voice shaky but defiant. "Oh, I absolutely would," I said, pulling out my phone. "And if you think I'm bluffing, stick around and find out." That was the final straw for his friends, who practically sprinted to the car. Greg stood there for another few seconds, looking like he couldn't believe what was happening. Finally, he grabbed his box and stormed off, muttering something about how I'd always been selfish. I didn't even bother responding. Once they were gone, I took a deep breath and walked inside. The place was untouched, thankfully, but I was still fuming. Greg's audacity never failed to amaze me. He truly believed that just showing up and claiming the house would somehow make it his. The next day, I decided to send a message loud and clear. I contacted my lawyer and had him draft a formal cease and desist letter to Greg. It outlined everything in plain terms. The house was mine. He was not welcome without my explicit permission, and any further attempts to enter the property would result in legal action. I mailed it directly to him and made sure it was certified, so I'd have proof he received it. A few days later, I got a text from my mom. It was classic Linda. Vague, guilt-trippy, and full of excuses for Greg. "Mike, don't you think you're being a little harsh on your brother?" I didn't even bother replying. At this point, I'd stopped caring what my parents thought. They'd spent years enabling Greg's behavior, and now they were reaping what they'd sown. If they wanted to bail him out again, that was on them, but I wasn't going to be part of it. Since then, things have been quiet. Greg hasn't tried to come back, and my parents have stopped pestering me. at least for now. The lake house is finally mine, no strings attached. I've rented it out to a lovely couple who take great care of the place, and it's become a nice little source of passive income. I'm so glad I stood my ground. I drew the line. I didn't let their guilt trips, excuses, or manipulation sway me. And, in the end, I came out on top. Greg might still think the world owes him something, but he's finally learning the hard way that entitlement doesn't mean ownership. As for me, I'm just enjoying the peace and quiet, knowing that I didn't let him or anyone else take advantage of me this time.